Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I'm preparing to check it on a worm bin that's already out here on the bench in front of me. It's a bin of red wigglers that has now reached the age of 117 days, and the last time we came in here to feed them 2 weeks ago, 14 days ago, they were receiving feeding number 9, and it was on the third feeding. So the first 2 feedings were kind of conventional, fed down the middle, but on feeding number 3 we initiated this pocket feeding routine where we're just changing the corner in which we feed each time. So every time we just go clockwise to the next corner, and today it's actually feeding number 10, but only the 8th pocket feeding. So this will actually, with the 8th pocket feeding, take us through 2 complete laps of the bin, or at least 2 visits to each corner. I guess when we return to where the first pocket feeding was, that's when we'll actually complete 2 laps, technically speaking. So let's get the camera pointed down into the bin so we can see what we're working on, and we can get started. So now in most households, if you were to stumble on a roll that was kind of forgotten about and has been forgotten about for so long that it's just completely covered in mold, the first impulse would be to just take it to the trash and get it out of the house as quickly as possible. But if you're like me and other worm farmers, your tendency is to want to keep stuff around that would normally go directly into the trash. I don't even know what this stuff is, to tell you the truth. Perhaps when we empty it into the worm bin, we'll be able to identify it, but those 2 things over there are going to be the meal that the worms are getting today, and it's extremely gross stuff. So now when we ended the last feeding, we sprinkled leaves across the top surface, and then we even took a coffee filter and we used the coffee filter to indicate to ourselves where we last fed. But there is absolutely no sign of the coffee filter, or for that matter, any of the leaves that were sprinkled out here on top. So it kind of makes me question whether we even want to bother with feeding zone indicators, since it's a dead giveaway where they were last fed. I mean, it's kind of fun. Maybe we'll just stick to it, even though it's not going to be there to help us see where we last fed. So as we normally do, we're going to start by checking where we last fed, rather than going straight to where we're going to feed today. And we'll do a quick backtrack of all the previous corners in which feedings had been applied, and then we'll get around to feeding at the end. But it's always interesting to see how previous feedings are progressing. And these leaves out on top are a little bit dry, I must admit. But right beneath them is some super damp material, and I've got my leaves, and I thought perhaps if things look good in here, we might do the same as we did last time, which is to top coat the system with leaves. And what we could do with these old leaves is use them as the foundational bedding for today's feeding. So let's see how the worms did with the last feeding they got 14 days ago. There are some really beautiful castings resting right out here on top. If you start to shove them aside a little bit, you do bump into a good many worms hanging out down here. I sort of just breezed through the video from last time, and I don't recall what we fed, but now I'm already starting to catch a glimpse of what it was. It's cantaloupe. I can see the rinds of it right here. And as you could probably imagine, cantaloupe is a pretty popular item in the worm bins. So it's not too surprising for us to come into this feeding zone and find that it's completely mobbed with worms. So yeah, we got a little bit of a party going on here. I don't want to disturb these little guys too much, but it is always fun just to kind of take a closer look at how they're doing, watch them squirm a little bit. But I think we'll return this material down into the feeding zone along with the wormies and let them continue their work for us. So now, I was reminded now of one of the other things that were fed last time, in addition to the cantaloupe, because the cantaloupe was a dead giveaway when I saw the melon rind. But right here, this little fragment of the tortilla fell off my hand. So that was one of the other things that they received as part of their feeding. What else they received, I don't know. And oh, look at that. The tortilla is actually holding together quite well. Hardly got eaten at all. The thing was kind of folded over onto itself, and I could even see a little bit of mold developing on it right there. So perhaps just by unfolding and breaking apart that tortilla, maybe we will help it along a little bit. And you know what else is kind of interesting? Despite the massive mob scene of worms down in here, I could see on this piece of cantaloupe how there's still some of the actual orange melon fruit on the rind. So I wouldn't have expected that they would have left many leftovers, but it seems like they did. So let's follow through on our little promise to return these little guys to their feeding zone. It's just hard to resist pulling out worms when there's a whole bunch of them right there to check out. It is pretty exciting to see. Alright, enough of this horsing around with the wormies. Let's leave them in peace to finish off what was put in here for them, this assortment of cantaloupe rinds, tortillas, and whatever else might have been fed to them down here in this corner. And well, don't forget, this was our second visit to this corner, so whatever it was that got fed in this corner previously would go back quite a way and might not even be showing any remnants of leftovers. So let's not go crazy trying to figure that out, because it's not all that interesting. We've still got a feeding to take care of here, and before we can do that, we want to still explore not only the feeding here from last time, but we want to go over here from 2 feedings ago and see how they're progressing. Now over here, I guess the cantaloupe must have really attracted their attention and drew the crowd over there, because here I see virtually no worms. Definitely see a good many castings, and it seems like there's some leaf stems and stuff like that mixed in with the material. There's a fairly nice level of moisture so far everywhere I've checked. So the plastic coverings that we've been using to protect the system from excessive drying and too much evaporation of the system's moisture seems to be doing a good job. So this, I don't know, it might be like the peel of an avocado, or perhaps the outer husk of a mango seed or something. I figured let's put it down there with the feeding zone to let it continue. Now we're going to the feeding zone that was last fed 3 instances ago, and here too I would expect to see perhaps not quite as many worms as we saw in the last feeding zone, but there are still a few hanging out and a good amount of moisture as well. Most of my systems, once they reach around 100 days of age, I have a tendency to start removing the plastic top coverings to allow the systems to air out and dry a little bit. And you know, I guess we have the option to do that here. I don't like it when things get overly muddy in my systems, but I bet you the worms really like it. So now here, last feeding, 2 feedings ago, 3 feedings ago, this is now the corner that we are going to be feeding in, but what we're going to bump into here are things that were either placed in here 4 feedings ago or possibly even 8 feedings ago. And the first thing I'm seeing here is the outer husk of a mango seed, kind of reminiscent of that little object I just placed down into the last feeding zone. Maybe that's what we saw over there, because it is pretty similar. And this to me looks like the stem of a banana. Let's keep the food items that we bump into over here so that we can get them back down into the hole with the new feeding. And I mean, that new feeding that we're giving them is pretty gross, I must admit. So I don't want to fiddle with it too much. I'd really like to just sort of get the moldy bread out of the bag. I'll probably need to sort of break it in half to make it fit into this corner neatly. And then we could empty that plastic container with whatever it is that's in there onto the bread, which will include some juices and fluid, which should help the bread get moistened. So I wonder why I'm stalling. Maybe because I'm a little bit nervous about needing to handle that really gross, moldy bread. But we've decided that that's going to be their meal today, so there's no going back. I think it's time to proceed with getting this extremely moldy bread out of this bag, and I guess I should really do this in a way that limits the amount of mold that flies off and gets airborne, because it's probably not the best stuff to be breathing. And then even here, this activity of trying to break the bread up a little bit, you might even be able to see, because I could see it with these nice bright lights that we've got, the mold spores flying off into the air. So I think we should probably leave it at about that. The more we fiddle with it, the more we're disturbing the stuff and causing the stuff to get airborne. And then this, I must admit, I did take a quick peek into the container up in the kitchen to see what the heck it was, and I was unable to identify it, but I think it's going to be avocado. So I guess this avocado was sort of peeled and had its seeds. It looks like more than one, so that's why I assume it was seeds. And the seeds removed. So I think this is something that the worms should probably appreciate. I had a hunch that that's what it was, but I really didn't want to take too much time fiddling with it. I was even worried about opening the container because I didn't know if it was going to stink, but luckily it has no odor whatsoever, which is a relief. I didn't know what to expect, really. So before we cover up, I'm dropping a little bit of pulverized eggshell, which is the grit that I use in my systems, and now we could backfill the feeding zone. So now, the one thing I had hoped to do in here, even before we started poking around and disturbing everything, was apply some Mosquito Dunks BTI solution. And that's not because I see any flying insects, it's only because I want to put it in here as a sort of a preventative measure. And I guess while we're at it, I could use that as an excuse to also try to dislodge some of this castings material off of my glove. I mean, the system certainly doesn't need any additional moisture going into it, but I figured we should probably get a little bit of this BTI Mosquito Dunks solution in here, because I do have my Vermibag Mini where I've had a little bit of a flying insect issue going on for probably a couple months now. And I do believe that it's finally a situation that's on the mend, because even though I still see a couple flying around here and there, I do feel like the numbers have been drastically reduced. So I think we're hopefully on a road to recovery in the Vermibag Mini. And before those pesky flying insects get any bright ideas about moving into another system of mine, I'd like very much to try getting the BTI out there for for preventative measures. So I guess this little tiny feather got scooped up by my leaf blower, which doubles as a vacuum and grinder, so it pulverizes the leaves into tiny little bits as it's pulling it up and sucking them into the bag. So we'll see what happens to that feather. I would have to assume that it too is something that can probably break down in the worm bin. But I got a feeling that feeding zone, just like we've seen in the past, is probably just going to be unrecognizable. It'll just be a damp corner, no sign of the coffee filter feeding zone indicator, quite possibly no sign of that feather, but that remains to be seen till the next time. So that's it for our check-in, everyone. I got a few things that I've got to take care of getting cleaned up and put away down here. But yeah, I'm not going to keep you around for that. That's boring. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.